Filthy animals like you belong in cages, not courthouses. Those words would haunt Officer Martinez for the rest of his life. Judge Kesha Williams approached the courthouse in her civilian clothes, the morning sun glinting off her briefcase. Inside it were today's case files, another long day of justice and paperwork. To everyone else, she looked like any professional woman heading to work. But to Officer Martinez, she was just another face that didn't belong in his world. Another ghetto rat trying to sneak in, he muttered under his breath. She barely had time to speak before his open palm struck her across the face. The sound cracked through the air, sharp, humiliating. Her head snapped sideways, her briefcase slipped from her hand, and papers fluttered down the courthouse steps like confetti at a funeral. Martinez stepped closer, his shadow swallowing her. You deaf? I said show me your ID, he barked. Kesha's jaw trembled from the sting, but her eyes stayed calm, almost defiant. I work here, she said quietly. Now, if you'll let me. He didn't. His hand closed around her throat, shoving her back against the stone wall. The chill of the marble cut through her spine as his grip tightened. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts. Filthy animals like you belong in cages, not courthouses, he growled again, this time louder, for the other officers nearby to hear. They laughed, the cruel, careless kind of laughter that echoes in nightmares. A few even lifted their phones, recording as Martinez twisted her arms behind her back and snapped on the cuffs. The steel bit into her wrists, a mockery of the authority she once commanded. One of them snickered. Yo, Martinez, she's feisty. Bet she's gonna cry for a lawyer next. Another added, ain't no lawyer comin' for her. Her eyes burned, not with tears but with rage, cold, controlled rage. She didn't shout. She didn't beg. She just looked up, past the ring of uniforms and sneers, to the courthouse door. 20 feet away, a bronze nameplate shimmered in the sunlight. The Honorable Judge K. Williams, presiding. Her own courtroom. Her own name. And yet here she was, shackled and humiliated by the same justice system she had sworn to uphold. Her lips parted slightly, just enough for a whisper only she could hear. You'll remember this day, she said. The laughter faded for a second, but Martinez only smirked. What was that? Nothing, she said, her voice calm again, eerily calm. He pushed her forward, parading her past the courthouse entrance like a trophy. Cameras clicked. Whispers spread among the bystanders gathering on the steps. A few recognized her face. A woman shouted, "That's Judge Williams." "What are you doing?" Martinez froze. "Judge?" His grip loosened slightly, confusion flashing across his face. "She's a what?" But before he could react, another officer hurried up, pale and panicked. "Martinez, stop. That's the Judge Williams, the presiding judge on today's docket." The world seemed to tilt for a moment. The laughter died. The phone cameras kept rolling. Martinez looked at her again, really looked at her, and for the first time, saw not what he thought she was, but who she truly was. The woman he'd just struck, cuffed, and humiliated was the judge who could now end his career, or worse. Kesha stood silently as he fumbled to remove the cuffs. Her face was bruised, her dignity torn, but her eyes, steady, dark, and resolute, never left his. When the metal clicked open, she took one step closer. "You'll call me Your Honor," she said quietly. And in that moment, every officer on those courthouse steps went still, because they all realized what kind of woman they had just tried to cage. The echo of Kesha's heels filled the marble corridor. Each step was a declaration, a reminder that despite the bruise forming on her cheek and the sting in her wrists, she belonged here. The officers trailed behind her in awkward silence, their laughter now ghosts that refused to die in their throats. Inside courtroom 3B, the air was heavy with murmurs. Reporters, lawyers, and defendants had already gathered. Nobody yet knew what had unfolded outside, but the tension walked in with her. Kesha placed her briefcase on the bench, the same one that had scattered like shattered glass across the steps minutes earlier. The courtroom clerk hesitated. "Your Honor, are you okay?" Kesha adjusted her robe slowly, her fingers tracing the embroidered letters, Judge K. Williams. She met the clerk's eyes. "Begin the session," she said simply. The bailiff, visibly uncomfortable, cleared his throat. "All rise." The Honorable Judge Kesha Williams presiding. The courtroom stood. Even Martinez. For a moment, their eyes locked across the room. The same man who had shoved her into a wall now stood at attention, his back stiff, his pride trembling. Kesha's expression didn't change. Calm. Controlled. Regal. She sat down, her voice steady. "Be seated." The sound of chairs scraping against the floor echoed like thunder. Kesha opened the first case file, State vs. Officer Martinez. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. He wasn't supposed to be in this docket, fate had written him in. "Officer Martinez," she began, her tone sharp enough to slice through the silence. "You stand accused of excessive force in a prior incident. Do you understand the charges?" Martinez hesitated. "Yes, Your Honor." The words came out hoarse, not from respect, but from disbelief that he had to call her that. The woman he had called an animal less than an hour ago was now the one holding his fate. "Do you have counsel present?" Kesha asked, eyes unblinking. He shook his head. "No, ma'am, Your Honor. I wasn't expecting." Clearly, she interrupted. Her gaze drifted to his trembling hands. "I assume you're aware this court takes allegations of abuse of authority very seriously." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The tension was electric, almost cinematic. Every word from her mouth was a quiet storm, years of restraint turning into precise, poetic justice. A public defender approached the bench hesitantly. "Your Honor, if I may, this is irregular, the officer wasn't formally on the docket for today." Kesha didn't look up. "Then consider it divine scheduling." The room froze. Martinez's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. Kesha continued, her voice low and deliberate. "This morning, before the court convened, an incident occurred on the courthouse steps. An officer, one assigned to courthouse security, used physical force on an unarmed civilian attempting to enter this building." Her words were factual, detached. But her eyes burned with restrained fire. "Do we have video evidence of this incident?" she asked. Every phone that had recorded earlier now became a witness. The bailiff nodded. "Several, Your Honor. They've already begun circulating online." Online. That word landed like a hammer. In the age of cameras, there were no secrets, only receipts. Kesha leaned forward slightly. "Then this court will recess for 1 hour while I review the footage. Officer Martinez, you will remain in custody until the matter is verified." He blinked, confused. "Custody? You can't." She lifted her hand. Tap. The gavel struck. The sound rolled through the chamber like thunder, final and unchallengeable. "You just learned what it feels like," she said softly. Court adjourned. As she stood, Martinez's face went pale. The very cuffs that had bitten her wrists minutes ago now glimmered in the bailiff's hands, waiting for him. The crowd didn't cheer, didn't gasp, they just watched in stunned silence as justice turned its head. Outside, reporters swarmed, headlines already forming. "Judge arrests cop in her own court after being assaulted by him." But Kesha didn't care about cameras. She just looked up at the same bronze nameplate on her courtroom wall and whispered to herself. "Now, justice begins." By noon, the courthouse wasn't just a building, it was the eye of a storm. Dozens of reporters swarmed the steps, their cameras pointed toward the same place where, only hours ago, Judge Kesha Williams had been thrown against the wall like a criminal. The footage, grainy, chaotic, but unmistakably real, had exploded across every social platform. The clip was barely 30 seconds long. But 30 seconds was all it took to destroy a man's career. Filthy animals like you belong in cages. Smack. The crowd gasped. The video froze on Martinez's hand, mid-swing. The caption beneath it read, "He didn't know she was the judge." By the time Martinez was escorted to a holding cell, the world had already judged him. His badge number was trending. His name was trending. And the department's phone lines were flooded with calls demanding his termination. Inside the judge's chambers, Kesha sat in silence. The bruise on her cheek had deepened into a violet bloom, but her eyes, calm and razor-sharp, told another story. Her clerk entered quietly, setting a phone on the desk. "It's everywhere, Your Honor," she whispered. Kesha nodded without looking. "I know. Do you want to make a statement?" "No." She picked up a pen, flipping through case files that suddenly felt meaningless. Let the video speak for itself. Outside the door, whispers grew. Reporters, lawyers, even officers who once smirked at her now avoided her gaze. The power dynamic had shifted, not because she sought revenge, but because the truth had finally stepped into the light. Meanwhile, Martinez sat alone in a small interrogation room. The bright fluorescent light carved harsh lines across his face. His phone buzzed non-stop with messages from his union rep, his wife, his captain, all unanswered. He stared at his reflection in the metal table. "Filthy animals like you belong in cages." The words echoed back at him, poisonous now, like venom he'd swallowed himself. The door opened. 2 internal affairs officers entered, faces blank and formal. One slid a folder across the table. "Officer Martinez," the man said evenly, "you're being placed on administrative leave pending investigation into assault and misconduct." Martinez laughed weakly. "Administrative leave? You mean fired?" The officer didn't respond. The silence was worse than an answer. Back upstairs, Kesha finally exhaled. She had held herself together for hours, but now, alone, the adrenaline began to fade. She touched her cheek gently, the same cheek that had caught his hand, and for a brief second, her eyes closed. Not in weakness. In remembrance. All her life, she had fought to be seen. To be respected not as a woman, not as a black woman, but as a judge, equal to anyone who wore a robe. Yet one man's prejudice had stripped that away in a heartbeat. But now, justice wasn't just a word on her wall. It was alive, moving, working through her silence. Her assistant knocked lightly. "Your Honor, there's someone here to see you." Kesha looked up. "Who?" "Officer Martinez's wife." The words hung heavy in the air. For a moment, Kesha said nothing. Then she stood. "Send her in." A nervous woman entered, eyes swollen from crying, clutching her purse like a lifeline. She looked nothing like the arrogant cop's companion the public imagined. Just another person broken by the fallout. "Judge Williams," she said, voice trembling. I wanted to apologize. My husband, he's not." Kesha raised a hand gently. "You don't owe me that." "He does." Tears spilled down the woman's face. "He's losing everything. The department, his friends, he's terrified." Kesha studied her for a long moment, then spoke softly. "Terrified is good. It means he's beginning to understand." The woman nodded slowly, unable to argue. She left quietly, closing the door behind her. Kesha turned toward the window. Outside, the media lights flashed like lightning. Somewhere in the noise and chaos, she found a strange peace. Not satisfaction, not revenge, but balance. For the first time all day, she smiled faintly. Tomorrow, she would return to her bench, not as a victim, but as a symbol. Because sometimes, justice doesn't need to shout. Sometimes, it just needs to be seen. By dawn the next morning, the courthouse was surrounded by a wall of flashing cameras. The incident had turned into a national headline, and a political nightmare. Inside her chambers, Judge Kesha Williams sat with a stack of new documents, complaints, statements, press inquiries, and an envelope marked, Internal Review, Confidential. She'd been through dozens of high-profile cases before, but this one felt different. This time, she was the case. Her phone buzzed. It was the Chief Justice. Williams, the deep voice rumbled through the receiver, I've been getting calls from the mayor, the governor, even the department union. They want this story contained. Kesha's hand stilled over the desk. Contained? A police officer assaulted a sitting judge on courthouse property. I know. But the department's under fire, and they're pushing for a joint statement. Something neutral. We can't have this turning into a war. She leaned back slowly, her eyes narrowing. So they want me to make it easier for them. I'm saying, the voice hesitated, pick your battles. Let internal affairs handle it quietly. She ended the call without another word. Outside her office window, protesters were gathering, holding signs, chanting her name, demanding accountability. Justice for Judge Williams. Stop police abuse. It wasn't just her fight anymore. It was everyone's. Her clerk entered, holding a folder. Your Honor, the department sent over an apology draft for your approval. Kesha flipped it open. The words on the page felt like acid. The incident was a misunderstanding, and both parties have agreed to move forward in the spirit of reconciliation. She slammed it shut. Both parties, she said sharply. Did they forget one of those parties was in handcuffs? Her clerk stayed silent. Kesha stood, her robe swaying around her as she walked to the mirror. The faint bruise on her cheek had begun to fade, but the memory burned brighter than ever. They want to sweep it under the rug, she murmured. But not this time. Meanwhile, in a different office across town, Officer Martinez sat across from his union lawyer. His badge and gun lay on the table between them, like relics from a life that was slipping away. They're throwing me to the wolves, Martinez muttered. The lawyer sighed. You hit a judge on camera, Martinez. There's not much they can do. Martinez clenched his fists. It was an accident, I didn't know who she was. Exactly, the lawyer replied, coldly. You didn't care who she was. Back at the courthouse, Kesha prepared for what came next. The Department of Justice had announced a formal inquiry, and every channel on television was running her face beside the caption. Judge assaulted by officer, federal investigation underway. The Chief Justice called again, this time more urgent. Kesha, listen. The department is willing to issue a public apology, but only if you agree not to pursue criminal charges. Her breath caught. Not to pursue charges. They wanted her silence, dressed up as diplomacy. She walked over to the window again. The protesters' chants rose through the glass, raw, angry, hopeful. She thought of all the faces she'd seen in her courtroom over the years. Victims who never got justice. People told to let it go, for the greater good. Maybe this was her turn to fight for them. She turned back to the phone. Tell them, she said quietly, that if justice is uncomfortable, maybe it's finally working. And with that, she hung up. The next day, she signed a formal motion, State versus Officer Daniel Martinez, assault and misconduct under color of authority. No more statements. No more silence. As the clerk filed the motion, Kesha whispered to herself, you wanted quiet, but justice doesn't whisper. It speaks. That afternoon, news broke that Judge Williams had officially charged the officer who assaulted her, against direct orders from the state. The cover-up was dead. The war had begun. The courtroom was silent, so silent that you could hear the hum of the ceiling lights. Every seat was filled. Reporters packed the aisles, cameras ready. Protesters waited outside, their chants faint through the walls. At the bench sat Judge Kesha Williams, robes pressed, expression unreadable. She had asked to preside only for opening remarks before another judge would take over. It wasn't about vengeance, it was about facing the moment. Across the room, Officer Daniel Martinez stood in a gray suit, no badge on his chest, no gun at his waist, just a man stripped bare before the law he once twisted. His lawyer whispered frantically, but Martinez's eyes were fixed on her, the woman he'd called an animal. The bailiff's voice cut the air. All rise. Kesha lifted the gavel, looked around the room, and spoke clearly. This court is now in session for State versus Officer Daniel Martinez. She paused, letting the name settle. I will not deliberate this case personally, she continued. My role here is only to confirm that the system we all serve still remembers what justice looks like. A murmur moved through the crowd. Then she turned toward Martinez. Mr. Martinez, before I step down, do you wish to address this court? He hesitated, throat dry. The same hands that had once grabbed her by the neck now trembled as he stood. He swallowed hard. I made a mistake. I thought she didn't belong here. I was wrong. Kesha tilted her head slightly. Why did you think that? He stared at the floor. Because of what I saw, what I've been taught to see. People like, he caught himself, voice breaking. I mean, I didn't look close enough. For the first time, his tone wasn't defiant. It was small, cracked, real. Kesha watched him quietly, then spoke, softer now. Justice is not revenge, Mr. Martinez. It's recognition. Today, the court recognizes your actions for what they were, abuse of power, fueled by prejudice. Whether you meant it or not, intent doesn't erase impact. Her words hung in the air like verdicts of their own. The new presiding judge entered, an older black man with silver hair. Kesha stepped aside, taking a seat in the front row among the public. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't behind the bench, she was simply another citizen watching justice unfold. The prosecution played the video again. The sound of the slap echoed through the speakers, the audience flinched. When the footage paused on Martinez's hand mid-strike, he turned away, ashamed. By afternoon, the verdict came swift and heavy, guilty of assault and official misconduct. Sentence: 3 years in federal custody, and permanent dismissal from the force. Gasps swept through the room, but Kesha didn't move. She just exhaled, slow, steady, final. As officers led Martinez away, he stopped near her seat. His voice was barely a whisper. Judge Williams. I'm sorry. She looked up, eyes calm but distant. Be better than sorry. Be different. He nodded once and was gone. Outside, the courthouse steps glowed under a golden sunset. The same steps where she had once been humiliated now felt sacred, washed clean by truth. Reporters shouted questions, microphones thrust forward, but she didn't answer any. She simply walked down the marble path, head high, the crowd parting around her like water. Behind her, someone began to clap, softly at first, then louder, until the sound spread like a wave. Kesha paused, turned, and saw hundreds of people standing, clapping, cheering, crying. For a fleeting second, the bruise on her cheek didn't ache anymore. It had become a badge, one she hadn't asked for, but one she had earned. She raised her head toward the courthouse seal and whispered to herself. Justice doesn't need permission. It just needs courage. Then she walked away from the noise, her robe brushing the stone steps, the setting sun catching the bronze letters on the wall. The Honorable Judge K. Williams presiding. And this time, no one dared question if she belonged there.